right, everybody, welcome to week 2. This week we're really going to be focusing on unpacking the problem. Before we do that, we do want to just take a few moments and sort of reflect on where we went last week there. And so at the end of the last session, we completed the Hack Your Curriculum Planner. This is where we really looked at unpacking those curriculum expectations and standards to break down learning goals into that know, understand, and do. So what did you want students to know by the end of this learning experience? What did you want them to understand? And what did you want them to do in relation to this learning experience? Thinking again about the know for those content, understand for those big ideas and concepts and understandings, and do's for the skills that you want them to apply. That how might we question was one that you had settled on for this whole cohort about that redesign of that playground apparatus for students. But thinking again about not just the design thinking process, but how the curriculum standards are linking back to that design process as well. So in this last session, as we mentioned, we spent some time hacking our curriculum to think about where the design project fits in. But what we want to consider now is how to put this plan together in order to build out this unit for our students. And so you want to be thinking about how you are actually going to plan all those different lessons and activities to really bring that content knowledge to students so that they can solve this problem and go beyond using just the design process as a method, but thinking about, again, how they are going to be developing deeper content knowledge, deeper understanding, and really applying those skills across those different curriculum areas. So we want you to consider the activities and lessons that students will need to complete in preparation for the design challenge. And so, as we mentioned in this last session, we want to think about those curriculum standards and those skills and that content that students need to have in order to solve this problem. So before we looked at a couple of different standards, again, coming from that third grade science, that design unit, and also the math unit, thinking also about that English unit as well, where they're going to be developing empathy. So it's important that you consider those different activities. So if students are going to be learning about area or perimeter in order to maybe redesign the blueprint model for this playground apparatus, you want to think about those skills and those activities you can use with students so that they can actually go about solving this problem and they can go about applying their skills of area and perimeter to solve this problem. So we like to use this matrix, and this is a what is possible matrix. And so you can see on the top left, we've got activities that are small and more student directed. That top right area is big projects that are student directed. In the bottom left, you've got small activities that are more teacher directed. And then in the bottom right, you have teacher directed big projects. What you want to consider for this is where your students fit in onto this matrix and where different activities fit onto this matrix. So for example, if we were thinking about bringing in that mathematics component and we're looking at area and perimeter, we may have a couple of teacher-directed small activities. So perhaps students are having a direct lesson about area, a direct lesson about perimeter. That may go in this bottom left quadrant of those small activities that are more teacher-directed. You may then also have math stations for students to work through. And so those activities might be under small activities still, but they're more student directed. So they're still facilitated by the teacher, but the student is really directing their own learning here when it comes to working through those table centers or those stations. And so we suggest using a matrix like this to really plan out your activities, plan out those lessons that you want students to use and to go through in order for them to really build that foundational knowledge that will allow them to solve this problem. So once you have done that, you might be asking about how we can put this all together. So you want to think again about those learning goals under that know, that understand, and that do. You also want to think about those lessons and activities that you want to use with students to build that foundational knowledge. And you also want to think about that design process as a whole and thinking again about it holistically as you consider your unit. And so the way we want to put it together is through a step called process mapping. And that's where we're going to be building out this unit from start to finish and thinking about all of those different activities that are going to occur in between. So to give you an example of what this looks like, we are going to show you a process map on how to make a peanut butter and jam sandwich. And so if we were to look at that process, you may have something that looks a little bit like this, where first you're cutting the bread, then you're adding peanut butter, you're adding jam, you're putting the bread together, you're cutting it in half, and then somebody is enjoying it. And so that is a simplified version of a process map. And when we look at each of the steps in that process, each step is referred to as a node, and that represents some sort of activity or occurrence that is happening there. And those arrows that are linking those pieces together are actually called links. And again, it's showing that progression of steps from A all the way to Z. And when you put them together, that's what builds a systems model or a process map. And so, what you want to be doing is thinking about your own process map in relation to your learning. And so again, it may look a little something like this, where you've got your learning goals down on the one side under your know, your understand, and your do. And then you might want to consider how you are actually going to launch this unit and this activity with students. You may want to think about some of those lessons specifically to build that foundational knowledge. Again, this can come from that matrix that we just looked at. And you want to think again about those steps in the design process and how you are really going to facilitate that learning and support your students as they are going through this design challenge. Now, what I would suggest you to do as you're building out your process map is to use sticky notes if possible. So each of these squares here represents a different colored sticky note. And the reason why we like to use sticky notes is because you don't want to start building out your process map and then realize partway through that you've missed a step and you have to throw it all out and start fresh. Using those sticky notes allows you to pick up those key pieces and move them around, and allows you to be flexible and agile in your planning. The other piece I would suggest as you build out your process map is to think about where those different entry points and those different touch points are between all of your groups here. And so thinking about that third grade class, the sixth grade class, the kindergarten class, building the foundational knowledge in Hebrew, and also thinking about that tech component. You want to think about how all of those key pieces are interwoven to really create this holistic design project for students across the board here. So I would suggest again using just paper, a big piece of chart paper, some sticky notes, and planning out your unit, and having this opportunity to collaborate and to share with one another what this unit actually looks like. Then, once we've done that, we want to think about unpacking the problem. And again, this is where we are thinking about supporting our students as they go to unpack the problem of this kindergarten playground apparatus. So when we are thinking about unpacking the problem, we are in the define stage of the design process. We are going to stay here for the next couple of weeks to really support our students in understanding what the problem is and to really develop that deep empathy. That empathy piece is really going to come out in next week's lesson. But for this week, we really want to think about supporting students in unpacking the problem as it is. And so again, the way we like to do that is with that formulation of that how might we question. And so again, you have that how might we question already prepared. And just to recall, we want to use that how might we protocol because how suggests that there is a way to solve this problem. The might suggests that there are multiple ways to solve this problem. And again, that we piece shows that it's collaborative in nature. So we want to keep our users, so those who are using the playground, at the center of this the whole time. And so just being able to articulate that to students is a really key piece. The questions that students are really going to be looking at to unpack the problem is what is the problem we are trying to solve? And so rather than just thinking about it as this big idea of redesigning the playground, what are all the problems that they are currently facing in terms of that playground? What are all the problems or the areas that students want to see in that playground? And really going deep into those different key problems, trying to be as specific as possible. So they need to answer what are their current issues or problems that they see. what is currently being done. So this is where they can think about that current playground and sort of that current redesign. So what is currently being done about this problem, and what questions do they have at this point? These might be questions for themselves. They might be questions for you as the teacher. They might be questions for a designer that can actually help them build this playground, or they might be questions for students in kindergarten who are going to be using that playground apparatus. But they want to think about all of those key pieces. And so if you are going into the app in module 4, you will see this as a handout. You will see this handout in a couple of different ways, and it's up to you how you would like to present it to your students. Here again, you have those 3 columns with each of those questions. You also have 3 different pages of paper where students can actually draw out their answers if they don't want to write. And then you also have another PDF which will give you that big box for drawing for each of those questions, and then a couple of lines underneath to write out a few key sentences or words to support their drawings. Then what students need to do is, after they've started that initial unpacking, they need to look at the question, how do you know your problem actually is a problem? And so when they are thinking about this redesign of the kindergarten playground, they're not going to be able to redesign it in an effective way, in a meaningful way, unless they speak to those students. So they need to understand what is currently wrong with the playground and what are students currently looking for in a new design. So that's where that research component comes in. And again, you can decide where you would like to go with this. One of those key pieces will eventually be that interviewing piece, and we'll get into that empathy building piece in the next unit. But they can also think about current research protocols. So looking online, looking in books, going out and doing an observation of the playground as it currently stands, and thinking about all of those different problems. So the questions that we want them to consider are really about those 5 W's. So who is affected by the problem? What is the problem that these individuals are facing? Where is this problem occurring? When did this become a problem? Why isn't there a solution for this problem yet? And why is this problem occurring? So again, you want to use the graphic organizer that is available in that app, and you'll be able to have that class challenge, how might we question. They haven't quite narrowed in their problem yet, so they can just talk about that redesign of the playground. And then they want to start filling in that graphic organizer with proper information based on what they have come up with together as a team in order to solve this problem. So that is where we want to leave off today, is thinking about how we are going to support our students in unpacking the problem, how we are really going to build out this unit plan by creating that process map to see how do we want to launch this unit with our students, where are all of those different activities and those lessons to run with our students, and where do all of these fit in relation to each other's plans and programs to really create this holistic learning experience for our students. And so next week we are really going to be digging into that empathy on that live video call. So before we have the opportunity to have students go out and interview one another, it is important that they spend some time unpacking the problem. So thank you very much, and let me know if anybody has any questions. Feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.